Pure Natural Sheep and Certified Chemical Free present How to Practice Organic Gardening Using St. Croix Sheep and the Ruth Stout Method of Gardening. The Ruth Stout method of gardening is when you cover your garden with hay and use it for mulch, and that's how you do all of your weeding, all of your fertilizing. And when you feed your St. Croix sheep, that same place where you feed your sheep all the hay is the perfect place for a garden. Now this spot is in a paddock where I fed my sheep for about 10 years with hay, and I never really knew that I could use it for a garden. A few times I did, but it's built up so much humus, you just wouldn't believe it. Just because the hay would sit on the ground and the sheep would eat it. Now I haven't used this area for a long time, but you can see the black soil that's there. That's all humus. That's something that's come out of hay bales for about 10 years. And so it makes sense that when you're feeding hay to your sheep, you should be using the same place to grow your garden. Now here's a spot about 20 feet away in the same paddock where the sheep had been, but there's no hay. I didn't feed any hay in this spot. You see how much tougher the ground is? It's fertile, but it's not anything like just pure humus like that other area was. So this made me realize something. And that is, in the same place where you feed your sheep hay through the winter, that's the same place where you should have your garden in the spring, summer, and fall, because when you raise a garden is not when you're feeding sheep hay. And when you're feeding your sheep hay is not the same time of year you're raising the garden. So to produce the hay chemical-free, what I'll do is I'll rent a hay field, or actually 2 hay fields, and I'll get some farmers to come over and they'll bale the hay for me in exchange for splitting the hay crop with them. And with the rent on the 2 hay fields and what I get out of it, it's about $25 for a round bale for producing chemical-free hay, which is actually a really good deal for any kind of hay. But you have to have the lease on the property, and it's not too hard. You go around, you find people that want to lease property, and once you do, then you have complete control over what gets sprayed on the hay, because most hay is being sprayed by some sort of chemical. So this is how I produce a lot more hay than I really need, and I do that on purpose. First of all, the hay gives me a solution if I have a drought or I have some bad weather and I can't produce enough grass on my own property. Then I've got this hay which they can always eat really any time of the year. And it keeps them good and fat and healthy. And the other thing is, if there is waste out of it, then I'm very happy with the waste, because I'm using the waste for the garden itself. Now, to use the hay bale, you take a chainsaw and you cut the hay bale in half, and it'll come out kind of like the skin on an onion. It'll just cut in half. You want to use your worst chainsaw blade, because this does dull it. And it can also make enough friction in there where you can actually catch some of the hay on fire. So you got to be careful about that too. Sometimes the hay will get up inside the chainsaw blade in that housing there and catch on fire. So you see a lot of smoke coming out. It's time to back off. But once you get this cut in half, it'll actually fall apart like the leaves of an onion. And you have to cut the bale apart on both sides to get it to fall apart. And so once you cut it down the middle, the hay bale will peel back like the leaves of an onion. You'll pull each of these sheets back, and that makes it pretty easy to drag around and cover up a large section of the garden with it. You'll also find a nugget of hay in the very center of these hay bales, and there's a lot of dust, so just be careful breathing it. Now here's the very nugget of the hay bale, and then once you get that out, the rest of them are just leaves. You can actually pull the leaves out and drag them around onto the garden. Now when you get to the very bottom of the hay bale, you'll find a little bit of decomposition where it's been resting on the ground. I find maybe like about an inch or so. It's really not a whole lot. It's not worth putting your hay bales up on logs. I looked at that. I thought that was a good idea, but when you take these hay bales, you let them sit out for a year, and you see how much is there. I mean, these things weigh about 1,500 pounds, and here they've got maybe just a few pounds of waste on the bottom. I really don't think it's worth it to put your hay bales up on logs, because you got to fish them out later anyway, and you don't want to be doing all that. Now, the hardest part is trying to actually pull the hay off. This is like the nugget part. The nugget's kind of tight, but you got to take your hay and you got to spread it out everywhere, and that's a nasty job. I mean, you're totally covered in hay dust. So I do this in the fall a lot when I know they're not going to be using the hay. Sometimes in the spring, but spreading out the hay is the hardest part. You want to do it really before springtime, because you want to kill all the plants that are trying to grow there. You want to cover them up so you don't have any plants poking through the hay. And you want to keep the hay pretty thick to kill all the plants. And so you move big sections of hay and drop it and cover up everything that you got. Now here's the same spot 8 months later in April of 2026. And you can see how the hay is flattened out quite a bit. We've also got quite a few of these plants that are coming up. Now, a lot of these plants have really good and strong root systems to send up leaves no matter what you do. So you got to take a pickaxe and go after them. Now, the hay makes the ground very loose and supple, and so pulling these roots up is really pretty easy to do. You just hit them a couple of times with a pick, and they'll come right up. So here I'm planting tomatoes here in the hay. And I've got my tomatoes in single cups. Now I buy them cheap with the in the 6-pack, small, and then I go out when they get a little bit bigger. I repot them myself, and that saves me a ton of money. Plus, you want tomatoes to grow. Now there's a bunch of sheep poop that's on top. So now I'm pulling back, and you can see the dirt is just different. You look at that; that is nothing but humus on top. Now it's only had maybe like 2 or 3 years here, so the humus is only going to be, just like 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch. And so I'm digging out a hole here to plant my tomatoes. And if you know anything about tomatoes, you want to plant them deep. And these are German Johnson tomatoes. That's one of the kinds I like. I also like the early girl. Now you see I've got a lot of good roots on the bottom of that's in that cup. And I want to push that down as far as I can and then cover it up with as much dirt as possible. And then the other thing I do is I take a pair of scissors and I cut the cup and cut down the side and then cut the bottom off the cup. And I leave that label that tells me what the plant is in case I need to check it. And I wrap that around the plant, and what that does, that keeps the cutworms from coming in. A cutworm will wrap around the bottom of the plant and cut it off even with the ground. And so I do that, and I put that collar around there, and that protects me on that. Now, the next thing I do is I use cottonseed meal for fertilizer on tomatoes, and I use just 1 8-ounce cup, and I spread it away from the plant quite a bit so the roots can grow out around it. And that is enough fertilizer, organic fertilizer, for the entire year. I've done this method for a long time, for about 30 years now, and it's worked really well with cottonseed meal. So here I'm putting up the stake to know what it is. Next, I'm bringing in this tomato cage I made out of concrete reinforcement wire. I made these cages. I made my first batch back around 1990, so they're like 36 years old. The second batch I made around the year 2000, so they're about 1/4 of a century old. And they work fine. You buy a big roll of concrete reinforcement wire, you take it, you cut off the ends, and you wrap it around and make your own cages. So you just repeat the same process with all the other plants that you have. I'm also planting peppers, work very well here, as well as cantaloupe. I've got cantaloupe, I've got eggplant, which I didn't know I had, and then I've got potatoes. You plant potatoes under hay, it works very well for potatoes. They come up and They're very easy to dig out with just hay over them. The other thing you need is an electric fence to keep your keep all the sheep off your garden once you set it up. Now I've got this charger set up, and I run a power line back to the house, and then the jumper lines down to the 3 strands I've got, and this keeps most of the sheep away. Now to make these 90-degree turns in this fence, I had to drill a hole back through the middle of it, through the middle of the connector insulator, and that lets the wire pass through, and I keep tension on the wire all the way around because it would pop right off the front. So that's what I had to do. The other thing to note is that the sheep manure is a very mild manure. It's kind of like cow manure. It's not like poultry or something that's going to burn up all your crops. So the sheep pooping on the hay is perfect. And the other benefit of using St. Croix sheep is that you don't have to use sheep dewormers. And if you'll do any research on your sheep dewormers and how they affect the earthworms and the dung beetles, these macrolytic lactones that they use in these dewormers harm all the beneficial soil organisms. And so you have a much healthier soil. And so the fact that St. Croix sheep are 100% parasite resistant and don't require these sheep dewormers, that's a good thing. Also, the carbon to nitrogen ratio for hay as well as for sheep manure, they're about the same, and they're both perfect for working together for composting purposes. So it's a really good match. So there's a lot more benefits for raising St. Croix sheep just than the fact that you're eating meat that has no chemicals on it. The other thing is that you can use these animals to produce a totally chemical-free garden that needs no weeding, no mulching, no watering. Once you have the hay on there, it makes its own fertilizer. They make the fertilizer for you too, but the hay also breaks down. And it's just the perfect solution. This is called the Ruth Stout method of farming, of gardening. It's quite interesting to look at. Well, I hope you appreciated the video. Also, be sure and check out our certified chemical-free website where farmers like yourself can find other farmers to trade livestock with that's chemical-free, like St. Croix and other animals that don't require chemicals to live, and where the general public can buy chemical-free food. Well, thanks.